Whitlow pulled the folder from her hands before she'd even cleared the doorway of the Tactical Operations Center. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He simply reached out, gripped the manila envelope she was carrying, and said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "Classified materials aren't for civilian consultants, sweetheart. Why don't you wait outside while the grown-ups get settled?" The room held maybe 30 people, rangers, intel analysts, fire support coordinators, men who had between them logged more combat deployments than most soldiers accumulate in a full career. Some of them laughed. Not all, but enough. The sound was quick and reflexive, the kind that escapes before judgment has a chance to stop it. She didn't step back. She didn't raise her voice. She looked at Whitlow with a steadiness that had nothing performative in it. Not anger held in check, not dignity being carefully maintained, just the simple settled quality of someone who had been in rooms like this before and had learned long ago that other people's first impressions were not her problem to manage. She said nothing at all. That silence, the particular stillness of a woman who understood exactly where she was and exactly why she was there, and had decided the room's opinion of her was not yet relevant, that silence was the beginning of something Sergeant First Class Whitlow would spend the next 3 days thinking about. FOB Ironwood sat on the western edge of Nineveh province in northern Iraq, at the end of a road that wasn't on civilian maps and inside a compound that didn't appear on any commercially available satellite imagery. It was October. The heat that had been pressing down on the province since June had finally broken, leaving behind a dry, gritty cold that came off the desert each night and sat inside the prefab structures until midday. The men at FOB Ironwood were not ordinary soldiers. That distinction mattered to them, and the world had given them sufficient reason to believe it. Master Sergeant Ford had 17 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 8 combat deployments, and an engagement record that ran to classified pages that almost no one outside a very specific circle would ever read. Staff Sergeant Kettridge had qualified expert on every weapons system the Army had put in his hands. Sergeant First Class Whitlow ran incoming personnel and logistics with a rigidity that some people found reassuring and others found exhausting. And he had been doing it long enough that he had come to believe his first read on people was one of his better qualities. They were not men who were easily surprised, which made what happened over the next 72 hours something that each of them, in the years that followed, would return to, not as a story about someone else, but as a reckoning with themselves. She had arrived in a commercial vehicle, not military transport, not with visible rank insignia, not with body armor or a weapon anywhere obvious. She carried a worn canvas pack over one shoulder and a long rifle case in the other hand, and she walked from the vehicle to the TOC with the deliberate, unhurried gait of someone who had already calculated exactly where she was going before the vehicle had stopped. Specialist Yates, 21 years old, 2 months into his first deployment, had been the first to say something aloud. He was near the motor pool when he spotted her, and he nudged the soldier beside him and said, "Think the Red Cross is making house calls now." His buddy laughed. 3 others within earshot smiled. She heard it. She didn't slow down. By the time she reached the TOC entrance, Whitlow had intercepted her. His voice was flat and professional when he asked for her credentials and authorization. She handed him a sealed envelope. He opened it, read the first page, and his expression did something careful and quiet. A micro-adjustment, like a man who had expected to find one thing and found something else entirely. "This clearance level requires Colonel Ashby to verify personally," Whitlow said. "I know," she said. "He's expecting your call." Whitlow stared at her for a long moment. Then he went inside. She waited. She didn't check her phone. She didn't shift her weight or fidget or do any of the small things people do when they need to demonstrate patience. She simply stood in the cold and looked at the western perimeter, at the flat, hard line where the desert met the sky. Whitlow came back 4 minutes later. Whatever Ashby had said to him had made a slight but perceptible change in the set of his shoulders. Not deference exactly, but a recalibration. "You're cleared for the briefing room," he said. His voice had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. She nodded once and walked past him. The briefing room at 0800 was full. Lieutenant Colonel Ashby stood at the front, beside a tactical display showing aerial imagery of a dense urban block in Mosul's eastern district. He was 52, gray at the temples, with a particular economy of movement that marks someone who has spent decades deciding what matters and discarding the rest. When the door opened, she took a seat in the back corner. Every head in the room turned. "Wrong building, probably," said Kettridge, not unkindly. He delivered it with the easy confidence of a man who assumed he was doing her a favor. "I don't think so," she said. "This is a special operations briefing. You'd need top-level clearance to be in this room." "I have it." Ashby didn't look up from his notes. "She's cleared, she stays." Kettridge settled back, but the looks continued. Quick sidelong exchanges, the wordless language of men who had worked together long enough to communicate without speaking. "Who is she? Why is she here? Can someone explain this?" Ashby clicked to the first image. A building. 4 stories, reinforced concrete, narrow window apertures on the eastern face. Dense urban structures on 3 sides, an open road on the 4th, the only viable approach. 48 hours earlier, he said, 3 American journalists had been taken to this building by a militant network operating out of the city. Intelligence confirmed they were on the 2nd floor. The complication: a shooter positioned inside the eastern room had maintained a line of sight on the road approach since the previous afternoon. Any ground team moving on the building would be visible from that position for approximately 200 meters before reaching the entrance. In the assessment of every analyst and commander who had looked at this problem, a direct approach was not survivable. "We need to neutralize the eastern shooter before the entry team moves," Ashby said. He clicked to the next slide. Elevation data. The building across the road, 600 meters from the target structure. A flat rooftop with a sightline to the eastern windows. "The complication," Ashby continued, "is the aperture. These windows are 30 centimeters wide. The hostile is not positioned at the window. He's in the interior, approximately 1.8 meters back from the frame, angled toward the road. A standard shot through that opening doesn't give you the angle. You're not shooting at the window. You're shooting through it, deflecting off the interior concrete to reach a target that is functionally not within your line of sight." The room was very quiet. Ford was the one who spoke. "Sir, that's not a shot. That's a physics equation." "Yes," Ashby said, "which is why we need someone who solves physics equations." And that was when the problem became apparent to everyone simultaneously. FOB Ironwood had excellent marksmen. Kettridge had confirmed kills at significant range. Ford's precision record was one of the finest in the regiment. But what Ashby had just described was not a marksmanship problem. It was a structural ballistics problem. The calculation of a projectile's path through construction materials, the angle of deflection off reinforced concrete, energy loss and angular deviation solved in real time on a rooftop in the dark. The kind of knowledge that didn't come from a qualification course. The kind that came from years inside a program with specific operational reasons to need it. Ashby looked around the room. No one spoke. From the back corner, without drama, without any apparent awareness of how the words were going to land, "I can take it." The silence lasted maybe a second and a half. Then the room broke. Not all of it was cruel. Some of the laughter was genuine and surprised. The kind that surfaces when something so completely unexpected occurs that the nervous system doesn't know how else to respond. But some of it was the other kind. The kind with shape and intent. Whitlow's was the other kind. She waited. She had learned to wait. When the room settled, she said calmly, "I'm not joking." Kettridge's voice was professional, careful. "With respect, what you're describing isn't a standard engagement. A deflection shot through a 30-centimeter aperture at 600 meters requires working knowledge of structural ballistics that isn't part of any training pipeline I know of." "My name is on the mission attachment," she said. "Level 4. You should read it." Kettridge looked at Ashby. Ashby was already looking at her. Something in his expression was different from the others. Not recognition exactly, but the specific attentiveness of a man who had encountered unexpected things before and knew better than to react before the information was complete. "What's your background?" Ashby said. "Classified above your current clearance level," she said. The room tightened. You could feel it. Ford had been watching her since she walked in. Not the way the others were watching, not evaluation as dismissal, but the particular focus of a man whose instincts had been calibrated by 17 years of watching people perform under pressure. Something about the way she had sat down, the way she held herself without holding herself. No tension, no performance, just presence. "Prove it," he said. She looked at him, then at Ashby. Range, Ashby said, 1,500 hours. Whitlow stood up so fast his chair scraped back. Sir. 1,500 hours, Ashby repeated, and that closed it. Word moved through FOB Ironwood the way it always moved, in places where boredom and tension lived side by side, instantly, completely, with a momentum that couldn't be stopped once it had started. By 1445, 41 people had found reasons to be at the Eastern Range. Money was changing hands. Yates had $20 riding on her, failing to hit the primary target cleanly. He'd found 3 takers, and all of them had accepted with the easy confidence of men who considered the outcome effectively decided. She arrived at exactly 1,500. When she set the rifle case on the bench and opened it, the murmuring started immediately. The weapon inside was not standard issue. It was a precision instrument that several of the more experienced men recognized immediately, a specialized platform built for people who needed to solve problems that standard equipment wasn't designed to address. The kind of rifle that ended up in specific hands for specific reasons that were rarely explained. Ford crossed his arms and watched. The range had been configured at her request, with a hanging panel of layered material in front of the 600-meter target, simulating the construction density of the building's window reveal, angled at 22 degrees off the primary axis. Behind the panel, the steel target was not visible from the firing line. You couldn't see it from where she stood. The shot would have to pass through the panel and deflect to the plate behind, whose position and angle had been provided to her in a written specification she'd spent an hour studying. Nobody in the crowd expected her to make it. Most of them weren't sure she'd try. She settled behind the rifle, made 3 small adjustments to the scope, pulled out a notebook, looked at something she'd written, put it away, watched the angle of the panel for a long moment, running something internally. You could see it in her eyes. The way the focus shifted inward became a calculation rather than an observation. Then she went completely still. The shot broke. The steel plate behind the panel rang. Nobody said anything. Ford uncrossed his arms. The next round was already chambered. She made a minute adjustment, fired. The plate rang again. The spotter, Sergeant Delmer, who had set up the obstacle and privately doubted anyone could reach it, pressed his radio. His voice came back slower than usual. 2 rounds, 2 hits, same deflection point on the panel. He paused. She's landing in the same hole. Exit angle is identical both times. The crowd made a sound, not laughter, a collective involuntary intake that belongs specifically to the moment when a roomful of people recalibrates at once. Yates looked at his $20. She shifted position, adjusted her calculations, and fired 2 more rounds at a different angle, demonstrating not just that she could solve the problem once, but that she understood the physics well enough to solve it on demand at different parameters in real time. Ford stepped forward. He moved through the crowd until he was near the front, picked up a spotting scope from the equipment table, and looked at the obstacle panel, at the exit points, at the grouping on the plate behind it. He lowered the scope. His face was not the face of a man who had been proved wrong. It was the face of a man encountering something he hadn't previously known existed. In 17 years, that expression had not appeared often. The men standing near him noticed it and understood without being told that it meant something significant. He looked at her. She was already resetting for the next configuration. "How long have you been working structural ballistics?" he said. She didn't answer immediately. When she looked up, she looked at him directly. "Long enough," she said. No pride in it, no performance, just the quiet weight of accumulated time. Ford nodded in a way that had nothing to do with rank or protocol and everything to do with one professional recognizing another. Nobody slept particularly well at FOB Ironwood that night. Yates lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, turning over not the $20. The money didn't matter, but what the money represented. A judgment made in 30 seconds about a person he'd never met and knew nothing about. He was 21 years old, and he thought he was getting good at reading people quickly. And this was the first moment he'd been forced to understand that quick and accurate were not the same thing. Kettridge sat at his desk, technically reviewing mission maps, but his eyes kept drifting off the page. He replayed the moment in the briefing room, his own easy confidence, the polite certainty with which he'd told her she might have the wrong building, the slight smile he'd worn while doing it. He thought he was being reasonable. He pressed both hands flat on the desk and stared at a map he wasn't seeing. Whitlow was awake too. He didn't pretend otherwise. He sat in the dark, thinking about the folder he'd pulled from her hands that morning, about the words he'd used, about the fact that he'd done it in front of 30 people. He thought about the apology he owed and the distance between a private apology and a public one, and the fact that those two things were not the same. Ford had gone to the common area at 0300. He wasn't surprised to find her there. Something in the way she operated told him her mind didn't stop when the day ended, that she was probably already running the mission in her head, the rooftop geometry, the wind patterns, the sequence of the problem. She was at the table with a cup of coffee and a building schematic spread in front of her. Technical drawings of the target structure's eastern wall. Margin notes in pencil, material density estimates, angular deviation tables, exit velocity projections through reinforced concrete at 4 different impact angles. Ford pulled out a chair and sat across from her without asking. She looked up. "You're not going to tell me to get some sleep," he said. "You're a master sergeant," she said. "You can do what you want." He studied the schematic. "You've already solved the shot." 3 possible solutions, she said. "This one accounts for the target's likely movement pattern based on the surveillance footage." She pointed to a position on the drawing. "If he shifts toward the window to check the road, which the pattern suggests he does every 40 minutes, the aperture opens to 48 centimeters for approximately 90 seconds. Ford looked at where she was pointing and was quiet for a long moment. "Which program?" he said finally. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "You don't have clearance for the name." "Try me," he said. She looked at him for a moment, the specific kind of measuring that happens when someone is deciding whether another person has earned a degree of truth. "There was an operation in Ramadi," she said. 4 years ago, 2 ranger companies were pinned in an industrial building. The official after-action report says a sniper team neutralized 3 elevated positions and cleared the withdrawal route. The report doesn't name the sniper team. Ford was quiet. "That was you," he said. She took a sip of coffee. She didn't answer because she didn't need to. Ford sat back. He put one hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he brought his hand down and looked at her with an expression that had too many things in it for a single word. Respect, yes, but also something older and heavier, something closer to the particular guilt of a man who has benefited from a system without ever sitting across from someone who bore its costs. "How many operations?" he said. "More than you'd expect," she said. "And the credit?" "Distributed to the units that were there officially," she said. "That's how the program works. The results are real. The attribution is managed." The words sat between them. Ford understood exactly what she was describing. He had benefited from systems like this without ever being made to account for them. "That's wrong," he said. "Not a judgment, a fact." "Yes," she said, "it is." They sat in silence for a moment. "What's your name?" he said. "Your real name, not whatever designation is in the file." She looked at him for just a beat before answering. "Nolan," she said. "May Nolan." "I'm Ford," he said. "I know," she said. "I read your record before I came here. Your work in the Panjwai Valley in 2018, the barricade engagement, the judgment call on the secondary position. Most people would have waited for authorization." Ford stared at her. "That engagement is classified." "I know," she said. "I had clearance." And despite 17 years in a world where composure was currency, Ford laughed, short and genuine and slightly disbelieving. "All right," he said, "all right." Something settled between them in that moment. Not friendship quite yet, but the beginning of something that could become it. The specific bond that forms between people operating at similar levels of expertise who unexpectedly find someone who understands the territory without needing it explained. The mission went at 0200. She was on the rooftop 17 minutes before the entry team moved, longer than she'd estimated, because she'd taken 5 extra minutes to run her wind calculations a 3rd time. The thermals off the urban terrain were doing something specific and irregular, and she spent those 5 minutes with her cheek against the stock, reading the movement of a strip of loose plastic sheeting 3 rooftops away until she understood the pattern well enough to trust it. Ford was on the command net back at the TOC. He could hear her breathing in the short transmissions, completely steady. The kind of steady that comes not from calm being performed for an audience, but from having been in places like this often enough that the fear has been integrated rather than suppressed. At 02:08, her voice came over the net. Quiet, clear, ghost actual, position confirmed. Target is at the aperture. I have the shot when ready. Ashby looked at the tactical display. The entry team was in position. Ghost, you are weapons free, your call. What happened in the next 4 seconds was something that Ford, standing in the TC, would spend a long time afterwards trying to find the right language for. The shot broke. There was no confirmation for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds of absolute silence on the net, during which no one in the TC moved. Then the entry team called, Eastern position down, we are moving. The building went in 8 minutes and 40 seconds. 2 of the hostages were ambulatory. 1 required assistance. All 3 were alive. The network's senior facilitator, who had been in a vehicle attempting to leave by the northern route when the mission began, was stopped at 600 meters by a second engagement through the rear window of a moving vehicle, in the dark, from the same rooftop. 1 round. The vehicle stopped. The surveillance drone overhead confirmed no movement. Ford closed his eyes in the TOC. Beside him, a young signal specialist said quietly, to no one in particular, who is she? Ford looked at him. She's the person who just brought your people home, he said, and most of this army will never be allowed to know her name. The debrief started at 0600. She spoke for 11 minutes, precise, sequential, not one unnecessary word. Timestamps that Ashby didn't have from any other source. Wind readings that the meteorologist in the corner wrote down by hand and would refer back to for years. When she finished, Kettridge was quiet for a moment. Then, the vehicle shot. Walk me through it. She did, objectively, without emphasis. Vehicle speed, window of straight travel, the lull in wind, the timing. Kettridge looked at the table. I said yesterday that shot was a physics equation, he said. I meant it as an argument for why it couldn't be done. She said nothing. I was wrong, he said, not to appear humble, because it was accurate, and he was the kind of man who valued accuracy above almost everything else. Ashby closed his notebook. He put both hands flat on the table. I need this room to understand something, he said. What I'm about to say is going into the mission report under my name, and I am formally requesting that it not be classified at a level that removes her from the operational record. He looked around the table. No one moved. Staff Sergeant May Nolan, the first time her name had been said aloud in any group setting, since she'd arrived at FOB Ironwood. He executed 2 precision engagements under conditions that exceeded standard operational parameters for structural ballistics, a discipline that does not formally exist in any branch of this Army's training pipeline. She enabled the recovery of 3 American civilians. She made a moving vehicle engagement at 600 meters in conditions that I am going to describe in this report as extraordinary, because I don't have a more accurate word available. He paused. She has done this before, 19 times, across 8 years, in operations that succeeded in part or in whole because she was deployed, and 19 times her name was removed from the record before it reached anyone who might have understood what they were reading. The silence in the room had mass. You could feel it pressing. That is an institutional failure, Ashby said. I am saying so in this report, I am saying so in this room, and I am saying so in whatever conversations this report generates, at whatever level it reaches. Ford was looking at the table. His jaw was set. He was doing the arithmetic. 8 years, 19 operations. Whitlow found her in the equipment room an hour after the debrief. She was doing post-mission maintenance on the rifle. She looked up when he came in. He stood in the doorway with the particular discomfort of a man who knew precisely what he needed to do, and had not done enough of it in his life to find it easy. The folder, he said, yesterday morning, what I said. You don't have to. I do, he said it without drama. I was wrong. What I did was wrong. I need you to know I understand that. She looked at him for a long moment, not coldly, not warmly, directly the way she looked at everything, seeing it clearly and deciding what it actually was. Okay, she said, thank you. He nodded once and left. He had expected to feel better after saying it. He didn't quite, because the debt had been created publicly and was being repaid privately, and he understood those were not equivalent. He was still working out what fully paid would look like. Yates knocked on her door that evening. He was holding a folded piece of paper, and he looked like a man who had talked himself into this moment approximately 8 times and was standing in the doorway, firmly committed to not finding a ninth excuse. "I wrote what I wanted to say," he said. "I'm better at it on paper." She took the paper. She looked at him. "I don't need this," she said, not coldly, just directly. "I know," he said. "That's not why I wrote it. I wrote it because I needed to. Because I'm 21 and I made a judgment call about a person I'd never met, and I need to understand that while I still have time to be different." She looked at him, at the clean, earnest weight of him, at the person he was in the process of trying to become. "Thank you, Yates," she said. He blinked. She'd used his name, first name. Before he'd introduced himself, before they'd exchanged a word directly, she'd already known it because she had read his file, and everyone's file, before she arrived, because she took people seriously before they had given her a reason to. He understood that as he walked back down the corridor, and he understood what it said about the difference between the standard he had applied to her and the one she had quietly, without announcement, applied to him. She left at 0620 the next morning. She came through the door of the accommodation block with a rifle case over one shoulder and her pack over the other, moving with the same quiet, purposeful economy she'd had when she first came through the gate. The walk that had read as out of place, as somehow wrong, on the morning she arrived, now read as exactly what it was. The walk of someone who knew precisely where they were going and had integrated the weight of everything they carried rather than felt it as a burden. She stopped. Standing at the gate were not 2 or 3 people. Ford was there, Ashby was there, Kettridge and Delmar and Yates and Whitlow, and behind them, in the gray pre-dawn light, 37 Rangers and base personnel who had gotten up before sunrise on a cold October morning because they wanted to be at a gate at 0610. Not because any protocol required it, because they had spent 3 days learning something about what it meant to see someone clearly, and they were not willing to let her leave without demonstrating that the lesson had actually taken hold. She stood at the edge of the formation and looked at them, all of them. The faces she had memorized from their files before she'd ever arrived, and the people those faces had become over 3 days, more complicated, more real, more worth knowing than any file had been able to contain. Yates was at the back. He met her eyes across the space between them and gave her a nod that was small and serious and meant exactly everything it was trying to mean. Whitlow was at the front. He wasn't smiling. He was holding himself with the formal stillness of a man whose words have run out and whose posture is doing what's left. Ashby stepped forward. He didn't speak. He raised his hand. Not because protocol required it, not because of rank, because there are things that need to be done in front of witnesses, in the daylight, in a way that becomes part of the record, even when no official document captures it. She returned the salute. One by one, without being told to, 37 people raised their hands in the gray morning light. Ford was last. He held it 1 beat longer than the others, not for ceremony, not for effect, but because 17 years and 19 operations he hadn't known existed until 3 days ago required 1 extra second to settle completely into his understanding of the world. She picked up her bags. She walked through the gate. She didn't look back, not because the moment hadn't mattered, but because she was already thinking about the next problem, the next rooftop, the next dark, and the people who would need what she could do. Behind her, Ford stayed at the gate long after the vehicle had gone from sight. Yates came to stand beside him. "She knew my name," Yates said. "Before I said a word to her, she already knew it." "She read your file," Ford said. "Before she came here, she reads everyone's." Yates was quiet. "Why?" Ford thought about it honestly. "Because she takes people seriously," he said, "before they've given her a reason to." Yates looked at the empty road for a long moment. "I didn't do that for her. I did the opposite." "I know," Ford said. "I'm going to do better." Ford looked at him. At 21 years old, at the particular clean weight of someone deciding who they intend to be, while they still have time to build it from the ground up. "Yeah," he said, "you are." The sun came over the desert horizon and hit the compound walls, and FOB Ironwood moved into generated, cycling, the smell of coffee from the mess hall drifting through the compound, the ordinary machinery of a military installation running exactly as it always ran, unchanged on the surface, and permanently different underneath, in the way that only happens when something true has been witnessed and cannot be forgotten. Because the most capable person who had ever come through that gate had arrived and departed like weather, leaving no official record that anyone could point to, and leaving something in the men who remained that no classification level would ever be able to redact.